Picture a textile mill in Fall River, Massachusetts, 1897. 5 stories of brick and iron, 300 workers. In the center of the building, a hole runs from the basement to the roof, 60 feet straight down. No railing, no gate, no warning. Through this hole runs a steel shaft as thick as a man's thigh. The shaft spins at 200 revolutions per minute. It drives every belt, every pulley, every machine in the building. A woman walks past this hole 20 times per day. She has worked here for 4 years. She knows to stay back. Today, her apron string catches on a nail. She stumbles. She falls into the hole. She drops 3 floors before the spinning shaft catches her body. The shaft does not stop. It winds her around itself like thread on a spool. By the time someone reaches the engine room to shut down power, there is nothing left to save. This is not a story about one hole. This is a story about the most dangerous architectural feature in American industry, the opening that killed workers, visitors, and children, the void that connected every floor and murdered everyone who fell. Before electric motors distributed power to individual machines, factories relied on central power systems. A massive steam engine in the basement turned a main shaft that ran vertically through the building and passed through every floor. At each level, the vertical shaft connected to horizontal shafts across the ceiling, and those horizontal shafts drove leather belts that powered the machines. One engine could power 500 machines across 5 floors. The vertical shaft was the spine of the entire operation. It was also completely exposed. Building codes in the 1880s did not require guards around mechanical equipment. Railings were considered optional. Gates were expensive. Those holes stayed open because closing them would cost money and would slow down maintenance access. The holes were enormous. A typical vertical shaft measured 18 inches in diameter. The hole cut through each floor needed to be at least 3 feet square to allow clearance for the shaft and its bearings. Some factories used larger openings up to 6 feet square, because wider holes meant easier installation and repair. These openings sat in the middle of the factory floor, often near the main walkways where workers passed constantly. The shaft inside the hole spun continuously during operating hours, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. The shaft never stopped unless the engine stopped. Workers walked past the hole hundreds of times per day. They carried materials past it. They ate lunch 10 feet from it. Children who visited their parents at work played near it. The hole was simply part of the building. Everyone knew it was there. Everyone knew it was dangerous. Everyone assumed they were too careful to fall. The shaft killed in multiple ways. The most common was the simple fall. A worker would trip, slip on oil, or stumble while carrying a heavy load. They would fall into the hole. If they were lucky, they fell straight down and hit the basement floor. Death from impact was instant. If they were unlucky, they hit the spinning shaft on the way down. The shaft was covered in grease and turning at high speed. It grabbed clothing, hair, or skin. The body wrapped around the shaft. The rotational force broke bones and tore tissue. The body continued spinning with the shaft, striking the walls of the opening on every revolution. Other workers could hear the impacts, a regular thumping sound, the body hitting the wall over and over until someone shut down the engine. The second way the shaft killed was entanglement at floor level. Workers sometimes leaned over the hole to check the shaft alignment or to oil the bearings. Long hair would touch the spinning shaft. Loose clothing would brush against it. The shaft grabbed and pulled. The person was dragged into the hole in seconds. They did not fall. They were wound down the shaft like a screw threading into wood. Witnesses described it as watching someone disappear into the floor. The body was pulled through an opening barely wider than the shaft itself. The compression and tearing were instantaneous. By the time anyone reacted, the person was already 3 floors down, wrapped around the shaft, dead. The third way the shaft killed was through falling objects. Workers on upper floors sometimes dropped tools, materials, or equipment. These objects fell through the hole and struck workers on lower floors. A wrench dropped from the 5th floor reached terminal velocity by the 3rd floor. It hit with enough force to crack a skull. In 1902, a spool of thread fell from the fourth floor of a mill in Lowell. It struck a woman on the second floor. She died instantly. The woman who dropped the spool was not disciplined. Dropping things through the shaft hole was considered an accident, not negligence. The holes had no covers. There was no way to prevent objects from falling through. Children were especially vulnerable. In the 1890s, workers often brought their children to the factory. Some children worked as helpers. Others simply stayed near their parents because there was nowhere else for them to go. The children played near the shaft holes because the holes were interesting. They could look down and see multiple floors. They could feel the vibration from the spinning shaft. They could drop small objects and watch them fall. In 1896, a 6-year-old boy in Philadelphia dropped a wooden block into the shaft hole to hear it clatter. He leaned too far. He fell. He dropped 4 floors and was caught by the shaft on the second floor. The shaft wound him around itself. His mother was working 30 feet away. She heard the impact sounds. She reached the hole and looked down. She saw her son wrapped around the shaft, still spinning. She watched for 40 seconds before someone shut down the engine. The boy's body had to be cut free from the shaft in pieces. Factory owners knew the holes were killing people. Accident reports were filed with state labor bureaus. Insurance companies tracked shaft hole deaths separately from other industrial accidents. In 1900, the New York Factory Investigating Commission reviewed shaft hole fatalities in textile mills across the state. They documented 214 deaths over 10 years. This was only New York. This was only textile mills. This did not include machine shops, furniture factories, or any other industry that used central shaft systems. The actual national death toll was certainly in the thousands. The commission recommended mandatory guards around all shaft openings. The recommendation was not enforced. It was considered a suggestion, not a requirement. Factory owners ignored it. The economic logic was simple. Installing railings around shaft holes cost money. The railings had to be removable for maintenance access. Removable railings required hinges, latches, and regular inspection to ensure they were closed. This added labor costs. The railings also reduced floor space around the shaft. In crowded factories where every square foot was used for production, losing space to safety railings reduced efficiency. Factory owners calculated that it was cheaper to pay wrongful death settlements than to install railings. In 1905, a typical wrongful death settlement for a factory accident was $400. Installing guards around a 5-story shaft hole cost approximately $800. A factory could kill 2 workers and still save money by not installing guards. Some workers tried to protect themselves. Experienced workers marked safe walking paths with chalk lines that stayed away from the shaft holes. They taught new workers to never walk near the hole while carrying loads that blocked their view of the floor. They established rules that children were not allowed within 10 feet of any shaft opening. These informal safety systems worked only when everyone followed them. One distracted worker, one running child, one moment of inattention. The shaft took them. Other factories tried painting the floor around the holes in bright colors to create a visual warning. This failed because the paint wore off quickly from foot traffic and was rarely repainted. The bright warning became a faded stain that nobody noticed. A few progressive factories installed removable grating over the shaft holes. The grating was steel mesh with holes large enough to allow air circulation and visibility, but small enough to prevent people from falling through. The grating could be lifted out when shaft maintenance was needed. This system reduced accidents by 70%. It also reduced production by 5% because workers had to slow down when walking near the grating to avoid tripping on the edges. The factories that installed grating removed it within a year. Productivity mattered more than safety. The holes stayed open. The engineering community debated solutions. In 1908, the American Society of Mechanical Engineers published a paper proposing fully enclosed shaft tunnels with locked access doors at each floor. This would have eliminated all shaft hole deaths. The paper was ignored by factory owners because enclosed tunnels would make maintenance significantly more difficult and more expensive. Another proposal suggested moving the vertical shafts to the exterior walls of buildings where they would be inaccessible to workers during operation. This was rejected because exterior shafts would require weather protection and would complicate the belt routing to machines. Every proposed solution reduced danger but increased cost. The factories chose cost over safety every time. The holes also killed through psychological factors. Workers became familiarity with danger. After walking past an open shaft hole 500 times without incident, the danger stopped feeling real. The hole became part of the background. A worker might lean against a support column inches from the edge while eating lunch. They might set tools down right at the edge of the opening. They might even step over the hole rather than walking around it to save a few seconds. Familiarity with the danger eliminated the fear of the danger. Then one day their foot placement was wrong, or the floor was slippery, or they were distracted. The shaft took them just as efficiently as it took the cautious newcomer. Some deaths were witnessed by dozens of people who could do nothing. The shaft ran continuously. Shutting down the engine took 10 to 15 minutes. The engine operator was in the basement. He could not hear shouting from 5 floors above over the noise of the engine. Factories eventually installed emergency bell systems that rang in the engine room when someone pulled a cord. These bells were often ignored because they were used for multiple purposes, including shift changes and maintenance scheduling. The engine operator would hear the bell and assume it was not an emergency. By the time someone physically ran to the basement and shouted at the operator to shut down, the person in the shaft was already dead. The delay between accident and engine shutdown guaranteed that shaft entanglement was fatal. The open shaft era ended slowly. Electric motors became practical in the 1920s. These motors could be mounted directly on individual machines, so there was no need for a central shaft system, no need for vertical shafts connecting floors, and no need for the holes. Factories that converted to electric power simply sealed the old shaft openings with wooden planks or concrete. The holes disappeared. The danger ended not because of safety regulations, but because the technology became obsolete. By 1940, most American factories had removed their central shaft systems. The great vertical shafts were cut up for scrap, and the holes were filled in or covered. The workers who had spent decades walking past 60-foot drops simply moved on to other hazards. The factories found new ways to kill people. The total death toll from shaft holes is impossible to calculate precisely. Records are fragmented. Many deaths were attributed to falls rather than shaft entanglement, even when the shaft was the actual cause of death. But conservative estimates from industrial historians suggest that between 1870 and 1930, open shaft systems killed at least 5,000 workers and visitors in American factories. That is one death every 4 days for 60 years. Most were women in textile mills. Most were under 30 years old, and some were children. All of them died because closing a hole was considered too expensive. For 60 years, every multi-story factory in America had a void in its center, a hole with a spinning shaft. No railing, no gate, no warning, just 60 feet of empty space and 200 revolutions per minute of grease-covered iron. You walked past it 20 times a day. You knew it was dangerous. You knew people had died. You believed you were too careful to fall. Then one day your foot slipped, or your clothing caught, or you simply leaned too far. The shaft grabbed you, and it did not let go until someone shut down the engine or there was nothing left to hold.